What is up, Internet? So, as of August 17th, as it quickly approaches, the changes from the recent NAR commission lawsuits are going to go into full effect and impact how you communicate with your clients. This means you have to have this means that you have about 2.5 months to solidify your value proposition as a listing or buyer agent if you haven't already done so. You need to be able to clearly communicate what you do, why it's important, and what it's worth to your clients. Knowing your value proposition backwards and forwards, like you know your own phone number, and having it ready to present is going to be crucial in this new era of real estate. Well, today we are here to help you put it all together. You're listening to the Texas Real Estate and Finance Podcast, and I'm your host, Mike Mills, a North Texas mortgage banker with Geneva Financial. I can't talk today for some reason. I don't know what the heck's going on. So on today's episode, we're talking about all things value proposition, specifically as it relates to your listing presentations. Now, if you've been selling real estate for any amount of time, then there aren't going to be any, earth-shattering revelations here. But what we are focusing on is how you explain and present this to your clients. Remember, we all know how important you are to the transaction and that you earn every penny of what you make. But what's the best way to communicate this, and how should you present it to your sellers for the best results? But before we get rolling here, if you find today's episode helpful, then share it with your network. We're all facing these new challenges together, and if you think our show can help someone then send it their way. I love new listeners, and you guys are the ones on the front lines helping spread the word. Plus, it would put a big smile on my bald face. So let's take a few seconds. So please take a few seconds, like, comment, and share. I'd really appreciate it. All right, let's get into it. Now, here to help keep me on track and be the brains of this operation, as she is in every other aspect of our lives, is a luxury listing specialist, expert communicator, and overall stunningly beautiful North Texas realtor. In fact, she is my own personal in-house realtor. Please welcome to the podcast, Susan Mills, my amazing wife.
Wow, what an introduction. Hi, babe.
That's right. Well, I gotta make sure I get brownie points here. I get in trouble a lot. So, I got to make sure I say all the right things. So before we start, I've been talking about this a little bit on the show from time to time. What'd you think of the Mavs last night?
Man, it was pretty close there for a minute. And I was really happy to see their free throw shooting improve.
Yes.
It was something to definitely an opportunity that they could capitalize on. Freaking Luka and Kyrie are fantastic.
They're great. They're great.
They're pretty good. And I like Lively. For a rookie, man, that guy.
You like his hair, the big hair?
I like everything about him. I like his rebounds. I like his enthusiasm. I just like everything about him.
Yes. Well, I'm really excited. And the Stars, we haven't been watching the Stars, but they're also in the Western Conference Finals too. So it's fun to be in North Texas right now, especially after we just came off the Rangers winning their World Series. Yeah.
Heck yeah. It's always fun to be a North Texas sports fan unless you're talking about the Cowboys.
Unless you're talking about the Cowboys, of course. All right. Okay. All right. So you ready for this?
Here we are, ready or not.
How are you feeling about it?
Nervous.
Why are you nervous?
I don't know. It's just, this is a time of change and we're all unsure.
Yeah.
So I think it's normal.
You're right. Nobody knows exactly what's coming. So we're just trying to prepare for it the best we can. So that's what we're going to do today is we are going to go into value propositions on being a listing agent, right? So how are you going to explain this stuff to your clients? What do you need to tell them up front? What's the process look like? How do you present it? How do you explain to them, that you're worth every nickel of what you're getting paid, and how are we going to go through that? So first off, let's start and let's talk about, or I want to tell everybody what we're looking at as far as why we're having this conversation. So as everybody knows, August 17th is the official start date of the changes to the recent NAR guidelines and the MLS information that you can put on the MLS that goes into effect. So what can you do and what can't you do, at least as of right now? So under the new rules set by the NAR settlement, sellers can offer compensation to buyers, sellers cannot offer compensation to buyer agents through the MLS. However, this does not prevent sellers from agreeing to pay a buyer's agent commission outside the MLS if both parties negotiate and agree on such arrangements. So can you give us a few specifics as to what exactly we're expecting here, dear?
Yeah. So unfortunately, sellers can no longer list the compensation through the MLS. So in previous times, you would be able to see what the seller was going to be paying the buyer's agent. And now that is not going to be the case. In fact, I heard that it was going to possibly go through starting in May. We haven't seen that. But sellers can still offer concessions in the MLS to cover buyers' closing costs, which can indirectly benefit buyers and their overall cost structure. This may potentially be a way for buyer's agent fees to be paid through different types of negotiation.
Right. You can still negotiate the fee. You just can't list it.
That's correct.
And then the other part of this related to buyer's agents is what?
Yeah, so buyer's agents are going to need to have a written agreement with their clients detailing their compensation structure. This really ensures transparency and clarity regarding how buyer's agents are going to get paid, whether it's going to be the buyer paying their agent themselves, the seller paying the buyer's agent, or possibly a combination.
Right. Okay. So we got the rules. We know what you can and can't do, at least at this point. There is a little bit of, so I read something the other day. There was a hearing regarding a commission lawsuit in Miami, and they were talking about how that buyer's compensation, or I should say that the Department of Justice is still looking to reopen their case against NAR. And one of the Department of Justice attorneys stated that that they didn't feel like that any compensation should be offered to a buyer's agent at all. Now, this was just a statement made by one of the attorneys, and it just happened like last week, but it is something that, they're considering. So we're not going to operate from the fact that sellers can't pay buyer agents, because right now that's not the case. They can pay buyer agents. They absolutely can. You just can't offer it, as of August 17th. So that's when it goes into effect. All right. So what that means is that we have to go in and create our value proposition as a listing agent. Okay. So tell me what your thoughts are as what the value proposition actually is.
So creating your unique value proposition is really what sets you apart, what makes you different, what makes you special. How are you going to get the most value, sell the home most quickly? This is kind of the minimum standard for why you should be chosen as a listing agent.
Okay. So as far as the value proposition is concerned specifically, okay, so basically just a general definition of it is it's a unique value proposition. Is in real estate, it's pretty clear. It explains, like you said, what sets you apart from every other agent that comes through there, and why the client should choose you to sell you their home or to sell their home. Now you have to outline specific benefits and services that you provide and how you're going to solve those clients' problems. And the key to this is you have to be specific, right? Because every agent is we're all trying to do the same thing, or you guys are all trying to do the same thing. You're trying to sell the house quickly, trying to sell it for a good price, and you're going to communicate with everybody well. That's kind of like the bare minimum of stuff you have to do, right? So you have to get specific. So what are some of those things that are specific as a listing agent that you need to do to be able to, communicate to your clients why they should pick you?
Well, I mean, first, how are your services unique? So what do you offer in terms of staging or high quality photography or virtual tours or whatever it is that makes your services unique to the other agent that'll be coming in for their interview after you? How does your experience and expertise set you apart? How long have you been in the business? How many transactions have you closed? What's your record for really doing your job well? And what's your client-centric approach? How do you make the process easy? How can you make your sellers feel confident that they've chosen the right person? And also, too, your commitment to quality. One piece of feedback that I get a lot is that, agents don't answer their phone. How can you possibly maintain a good relationship with not only your clients, but the buyer's agent and the title company and possibly the lender and maybe the surveyor and the home inspector who's locked out? And oh, by the way, the agent that was just in the house accidentally locked themselves out. I mean, you have to be able to continue to show the quality of your service that you provide.
Right. And you have to be able to communicate that to the client as well. Like that's the big piece of this, right? Because I think everybody will say, I communicate well, but what does that mean? Like when you say you communicate well, what does that mean?
Right.
Right. And you have to be able to spell that out so your client understands with all the steps that you have to go through. Like you said, communicating with the buyer's agent, communicating with the inspector, communicating with an appraiser, communicating with the lender, communicating with everybody throughout the process. If you just say, I communicate well, and you don't explain to your client what that means, I mean, they may hear it and it may be okay, but they have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, and I think the end goal is to make it seem like we really didn't do anything.
Right.
It just we got the buyer and then we just walked into title with our bottle of champagne and it was perfect. And that's what we're hoping for. But
right. But
there's a lot of steps in between that.
Well, but these days, especially with commissions being such a focal point, then this also brings into effect that yes, you want it to seem like a seamless transaction, but in the very beginning, at least, you have to be able to explain why the transaction is seamless and why your years of experience are going to make the transaction seamless. So that way, when you sit down the first time and you talk to a buyer and you say, okay, or excuse me, a seller, and you say, okay, here's all the stuff that I'm going to do for you. And these are all the things that I'm going to handle throughout this transaction. And by the time we get to the end, you'll have forgotten about all that because you didn't feel it at all. And that's why you need me as a professional, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, for you specifically. So when you talk to your sellers, what is it about you that you give as far as your unique value proposition? Not that you're just a great agent, but what is it that your unique skill set brings, like as an example, that you give to your clients?
Well, I think for me, and it's not for everybody, but I think that my specialty is staging and design. That's something that I have a passion for. It's something that I've tried to develop over the years. I've got some experience doing staging and virtual staging and basically general design. It kind of started as a hobby for me, and then that has kind of bled into my professional career as a real estate agent. And it's something that I love and I'm very passionate about. And it's super fun that I can kind of do both at the same time to get listings ready to go.
Yeah. So you're focusing more so on, when you talk to a client, you're explaining to them about how you can make their house be as appealing as possible whenever they're going to list it, which is why, especially with the higher end homes, this is a big piece of it, because someone's spending that much money on a property, then obviously, they want to sell it for the highest price they can, but they have to see themselves within that. And so what you try to do, and the message that you try to send to your clients, is to say, okay, I'm going to make sure that this house presents itself in the best light possible because this is what I'm an expert at. So when you build your value proposition with your listing clients, that's kind of the thing that you frame it around, right?
Absolutely.
But everybody's going to be a little bit different.
And some houses don't need that, and some
Right.
clients don't need that, but it is something that I do offer that can set me apart. And so
Right.
that's something that is important to my
And some people do social media. Some people do, they're really good with networking. I mean, everybody's got their own skill set, right?
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the minimum expectation. Everybody, does the minimum, but what makes you different? What makes you special? What makes you appeal to a seller?
Right. Okay. So, let's talk about the process of going through the listing. Okay, so you are going to set up a meeting with a client, and what does that process look like for you? So when you do a listing presentation, kind of what are the steps? What are you expecting? Right in the beginning, what kind of expectations are you setting? So let's just start with, what's your general parameters for a listing presentation?
So you can meet with a seller over the phone. I much prefer to meet with them in person. There's a lot of things that you physically cannot tell unless you're on the property. Some of that has to do with how the house is going to show online, but also what do the neighbors' homes look like?
Right.
How does the house smell? How do they live in the house right now? Did they prepare for you? They wanted to have their agent or possible agent come over to the house and they want it to be in a good light. So is it tidy and well kept, or is it a mess?
Right.
You can't really tell that in person. So
You can't tell over the phone.
oh, yeah, over the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing too is one thing that's really, really important. And I think aside from the money piece, what is their timeline? Why are they moving and what is their timeline?
So all right, when you set up a meeting with somebody, are you trying to do everything at once, or are you trying to do multiple? Like how many meetings do you have with a client typically when you set it up?
So typically before listing, I like to have one in-person meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like to then have a follow-up conversation after I've kind of done my presentation. And then prior to the listing, we'll go over with the photographer and have another opportunity to kind of revisit some things. But that's generally what it
So
looks
you have
like.
3 meetings or 2 meetings, or how many meetings do you have?
One in person.
So let's say I call you and I'm like, hey,
Uh-huh.
Susan, I want to list my house. How does that go?
Well, you call me and say that you want to list your house.
Mhm.
And then I say, first of all, why are you moving? And when are you moving?
Mhm.
And can we get together?
Right. Okay.
I need to get their physical address because I need to do some research,
Right.
but I want to physically look at the property.
So your first phone call is just, hey, we want to do this. And then you say, okay, great. What's your timeline? So then you can set a meeting and then you try to physically go to the property.
Yeah. And, usually for me, it's a little bit more organic than that. I like 99% of my business is business by referral. Oh, my cousin is selling their house. Oh, her. She was at, Billy's baseball game or whatever. So a lot of times I already kind of know who I'm talking to. So
Yeah.
it really is just getting the general information, scheduling a meeting, and then, doing a little preparation prior to meeting in person.
Gotcha. Okay. So then you're meeting with them for the first time to kind of go through some basic stuff to get some data, right? So what kind of information are you looking for in that very first conversation or that very first meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I need to know, obviously, like I said, why are they moving? What's their timeline? What kind of features do they have in the home that I may not be able to see that would possibly set them apart? Whether that's something great like a full in-home generator or a new roof, or something bad that's not ideal that I need to be prepared for. Just kind of tell me a little bit about the home. Why is it special? Any problems that you kind of foresee being an issue? And what's your expectation of value for the house, so I can kind of have an idea of a ballpark. And usually they'll say, oh, a couple of weeks ago, we had a new listing come up in the neighborhood. It's listed for X amount of dollars. So they kind of have a general idea of worth. It's kind of rare that somebody's like, oh man, I have no idea what the house is worth.
Right.
And then just kind of getting some general backstory so that I can be prepared to walk in the door for that initial in-person meeting.
So as far as when you're talking about the condition of the home, and you said something about, you want to know what's wrong with it. So, I mean, you're obviously not going to phrase it that way, but why do you need to know the bad side of what's happening there? Well, like with the property itself?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's obviously going to affect the price.
Right.
So, if there's something of significance that isn't right with the home, we need to be really clear and upfront about that. We need to be able to strategize around that.
Right. And then this relates to like seller's disclosures and making sure that everybody's covered, so there's no issues if somebody buys the house and there was something that was undisclosed, basically.
Sure. Or, for example, sometimes it has nothing to do with the home, but there is a neighborhood here in where we live that the homeowners association is having a really hard time because a lot of the infrastructure that was done is now not holding up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that does not sound great to a potential buyer coming in, that the curbs are falling apart. They're having to reframe any house that has like a stone exterior. They're having to reframe the archways and put these like temporary stabilizers up.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's of significance, and it's not good. And I couldn't price that house properly without knowing that.
Right. Without being aware of the issues with it.
For sure.
Is there anything else about finding out what they think the price of the house should be that kind of helps you for your second meeting when you come in?
Yeah. I mean, you want to meet or exceed expectations always.
Right.
You want to be straight and upfront and clear, but our goal is to meet or exceed expectations. So knowing what their expectation is certainly helpful.
Right. Well, because then you'll be able to set the price according. Well, you'll know that if you come in well below what they think the price is, that you're going to have to, how you're going to have that conversation, right? Because it's not exactly, if somebody thinks their house is worth $1 million and it's only worth 800,000 in your opinion as an agent looking at the comps, that's a different conversation than if someone thinks that their house is worth $1 million and it's worth $950 or $999, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's a totally different conversation that you're going to have with somebody, and knowing that up front and making sure that you have all that information is going to help you when you have your second meeting. And when you go through actually, okay, the first meeting is really, here's what I can do, or here's what I need to know, right? Here's what I'm trying to find out about you, about the property. You're trying to get a gauge on how to communicate with that person, right? What kind of communication standards they deal with, what their personality's like. Are they, very engaged and have a lot of opinions, or are they dry? And you're going to have to lead the conversation a little bit. So all of that comes into play in that first meeting of trying to get an idea of who this person is, what their house is like, what it looks like, what are the problems I'm going to have, what are the benefits of this property. Okay, now I can take all of that information and I can go back and put together my presentation, right?
Absolutely.
And that first meeting is going to be incredibly important, because that's when you get all of the data that you need in order to come back the second time and go through exactly what it is that you're going to do as the agent to help them sell their home, and what value associates to that. Okay. So, all right. So we've had our first meeting. We've gone through, we've talked to the client. We've looked at their property. We found out all the good and bad stuff. Now it's time for our second conversation with them. Now, I think, some agents will do this over the phone. Some people will do this in person. It all just depends. I think that in person, as much as possible, is probably going to give you, you need to be in person at least once, like you said, because you have to see the house. But then on that second meeting, you're going to present to them all of the things that you're going to do in order to help them sell the house. So, what are kind of the main hit points when you're sitting down in that second meeting that you're going to have with a client to say, okay, here's the stuff we're going to go over today. What are you going over with them specifically in that second one?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, we're going to go over, how to show the house. That's going to be important. There's a lot to that, but how we're going to strategize on showing the house, what to expect during those showings. How do I plan on marketing the home, and what's our pricing strategy?
Okay. So, generally speaking, do you like to have something physical that they can have, or are you trying to do like a PowerPoint, or what do you think is the best route to go as far as like having stuff for them to either take with them or keep or whatever?
I prefer to have a folder for them that has a lot of outlines, timelines, photographs, things like that, just so that they can have things to reference later, because we do this every day and we're accustomed to the process. But I think that sometimes, especially if somebody hasn't moved in a while, this is like drinking from a fire
Right.
hose. I mean, it's just a lot of information. So having them, and also too, let's remember this is, in the best of circumstances, this is still an emotional time for them.
Yes.
And so, they're maybe thinking about, oh my gosh, this really got real. Just all of a sudden, like yesterday, it was just an idea. And now this agent's in my kitchen, and now I'm not even listening to what she's saying. I'm just worried about where we're going to move or how we're going to find the next house, or whatever the circumstances. So I like to have all of that printed so they can reference it later.
Well, and part of that's related to what you were talking about earlier with the timeline, right? Because if you understand why they're selling and what their timeline is, then you can gauge how this conversation needs to go. Because if they're like, oh, we're in no hurry, or, we're not exactly, we just want to see if we can get the price we want. Well, then it's a different conversation than if someone's like, I'm moving to Ohio in 60 days and we have to be there. So I got to get my home sold today.
Right. And do I need the cash to buy the next house?
Right. Right. Okay. So let's talk about when you discuss with them, what makes, how we're going to show the house, like what the process, or I should say, what are you telling them that they need to do to make sure that this house shows well? And then we're presenting this in some sort of a document, I guess, so that way you can have this all lined out as you go through it as like a visual aid. So you're going through exactly what your expectation, or what their expectations should be when it comes to listing their house.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some things that will certainly make the house show the best. One thing that's really interesting, as real estate has evolved, if you have a home inspection and something has come up a while ago, you used to just be able to tighten a bolt, or you used to be able to have your brother-in-law, who was a carpenter on the side, do a deck repair or something like that. And times have really changed. The contract was updated about specifics on the skilled type of laborers that can be in the house and what kind of appropriate licensings they need. And so one thing that I like to share with my clients is that if there's little things that that you can do yourself, and I'm not talking, don't get out over your skis and do something that you're not qualified to. I mean, if your light fixture is blinking and you're not an electrician, don't mess with that. But what I'm saying is that if there are small repairs that you can make that you feel qualified for, go ahead and do that. All the little things that have been annoying you about your house that you just haven't gotten around to, I promise you it's going to annoy the inspector as well. And what you don't want is you don't want the home inspection to come out and be so completely overwhelmed, have the buyer be so completely overwhelmed by little things that you could have taken care of. So one thing I like to say is, if you can do it, go ahead and do it. It's going to save you a heck of a lot of money instead of paying, a master plumber $100 an hour to tighten the bolt on the toilet seat.
Right.
Because that's literally what you'll be doing. You can't turn that wrench once the house is under contract.
Do you ever kind of walk through and like with the client when you're there and, look at anything like that and give them ideas?
I love to. And I will stay with a client for as long as they want. And some are like, no, we're fine. Thanks for the information. And, whatever. And some are like, they want to show me like everything since 1981. And I'm totally fine with that.
Right.
That's great. It just totally depends. But that doing some of the small things is really important. And then attention to detail is really important, in my opinion. And, I am so fortunate to work with some really excellent photographers, and they can do some editing. But what you don't want to happen is you don't want to catfish your buyers. You don't want them to look at this beautiful house online where the grass has been touched up and the lighting has all been enhanced, and then they get to your home and they're disappointed.
Right.
Because that's an inconvenience for my precious sellers as well, because they've gotten the house ready to show, and then a buyer walks in, opens the door, tells their agent they're out of there. So we're talking about meeting the expectations so it shows just as well in person. And some of those things are, making sure that the light bulbs are the same color, making sure that the lawn is well maintained throughout the entire process of listing to close. Doing things like power washing or adding mulch is a great thing. Just little things that you can do to really make sure that a buyer
Adding
knows.
mulch?
The flower beds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not mulch in the living room?
No, no. Just keeping the yard maintained, adding fresh mulch, and
Come on a little closer to that, Mike. There you go.
things like that. So, yeah. And then one thing you just have to be careful with, in my opinion, is just to make sure that you're not overwhelming somebody. You don't want to come in and make their house feel like it's being picked apart, but just giving people a general idea of ways that their house can show better once people are actually in the door.
Okay. So, it's hard when you're telling someone how to fix their home or make it look better. So how do you navigate that conversation when you're talking to somebody about, like taking their pictures down, or, the fact that they have cats or dogs in the house and it makes it smell like, what do you like? How do you do that?
That is sometimes sensitive.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times people are pretty self-aware. They're
Right.
like, hey, we know that we need a fresh coat of paint. We just haven't really gotten around to it. We weren't motivated to do that. Or, sometimes they don't. I do ask them, I'm like, are there any issues that you're aware of that you had planned on addressing before I got here? And sometimes they're like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry we didn't have time to do this. This is on our list. We'll have it accomplished prior to listing. And that kind of takes the heat off of an agent having to tell them that there are opportunities to have their house show in a better light. A lot of times too, though, people just don't think about it. And so I ask, when you're looking at homes online or you're looking at homes in a magazine, it's just clean and like serene looking.
Right.
You're not distracted. So I encourage them to take away anything that's distracting, particularly in the photo. So any personal items that would look like somebody lives there, I know people live there, but we don't want it to look like that,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right.
And I don't mean, it doesn't need to be down to the salt and pepper shakers, but I'm encouraging them to do a lot of declutter because they're going to have to pack it anyway.
Right.
If they're motivated to sell and I'm already here, go and get, 5 or 10 totes from the Home Depot and start packing away those things that are precious to you that you don't want to get broken, and things that are cluttering the house to make the photography look not at its best.
Do you think that, when you're going through this, like, if you're going to present, so we're talking about the listing presentation in general, because again, this is all about creating your value, right? So we're trying to explain. So part of you explaining this to your buyers is to help them understand, hey, look, this is going to help your house sell quicker. This is going to put or explain to your sellers. I mean, this is going to put buyers in the right mindset to look at the home and like, we could live here. We could see ourselves living here because I don't see Mr. and Mrs. Smith's wedding photo on the mantle, right? Because I want to see myself in this house and that's where I want to be. And so as a realtor, as a listing agent, when you're talking to your sellers, you have to not just tell them what they need to do, right? But you have to tell them why they need to do it, because this is what your years of being a realtor has shown you, right? This is what you've learned, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I do and I enjoy to do. A lot of my clients don't need it, but some do need the help. And I will go over and just kind of help them to, I'm not going to be packing the boxes,
Sure.
but I will go over and just kind of we'll start making notes and mark down ways that what they can do, what they need to take down, and kind of help them prepare. And I think that is a benefit in the sense also is that they have less to maintain during that showing
Right.
process. If they don't have a lot of tchotchkes everywhere and things like that, it's going to minimize their effort and stress when they get a showing at 7:30 p.m. and they really want to accommodate it. It's just fewer things that they'll have to do. And so just letting them know that this up front might be a little bumpy, but it's really going to ease your sense of what you need to do. Right. Once buyers are
and that goes back to part of what your value proposition is, right? Because you are there helping them, saying, okay, I will help you walk through your home and tell you what we need to stage appropriately, what things we need to take down, what you need to fix. That's part of the value that I'm bringing to this for you, is I can show you all this stuff because I've sold hundreds of homes before. And I know what shows well, excuse me. And I know what buyers are looking for. And so that's what you do. Now, if you're somebody that say is a social media person and you're going to show their home well, then maybe what you're talking about is lighting in certain rooms so you can film, this particular bedroom or this particular kitchen. Or if you're really good at photography and you that's the biggest piece of you, and you have a drone and you do an aerial scope of the house, maybe you walk through and you show them, okay, here's where we're going to, bring it through. We want to see the backyard. We want to see the front. I have a small one that can go through the house, not me, but if you're an agent and you have that can actually fly through the house. This again, you are showing what your expertise is during the second meeting. So you're saying, in your case, as Susan Mills listing agent, you're saying, I'm going to help you stage this thing so it looks immaculate. And here's all the things that you need to do. If I'm a social media value person, then I'm saying, okay, here's the things that I need to have in the house so I can film it properly, so I can demonstrate, to people online, the best look for it or whatever. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about like anything? How do you feel about special things highlighting what is unique about the house?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're preparing for the showing, one thing that is important is that any special features that you have a media room or a awesome sound system or specialty pool lights and fountains or a koi pond or whatever your house has to that whatever your house has that sets it apart, that's something that I do love to prepare my sellers. Like, please go ahead and have this turned on if you're able to. Now with technology, sometimes it's as easy as an app where they can turn their waterfall on from their office on their on their app. And sometimes it's a little more in depth than that. But if you've got awesome features, let's show it off during the showing.
Right. Now, do you think that you should have a kind of like a checklist of all of these things that they need to do, before a showing shows up? Like the things that they need to make sure that they take care of before because if somebody's leaving in the middle, like if they get a phone call, or a listing email or whatever, and their house is showing at 2:00 and it's 12:00, what do they need to do before they leave to make sure that the house shows appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And the Murphy's Law situation is that if the one day you left your underwear on the floor, that's the one day you're going to have 10 showings.
Right.
So it is really nice. It's something that I do like to put together. Not, like I said, not all clients need it.
Yep.
They're, already on edge, or they definitely want to make sure that the house shows in the best light possible. And there are clients that I have that like will wash a window before a client walks in. I'm like, that's not necessary.
Right.
But I do make a list of things, if they're not able to turn lights on and things like that, the showing agent is going to do that. That's
Sure.
no big deal. But no dirty dishes in the sink. Make sure that your pets are secure. That's a really big thing. And my preference is that pets are gone. And the reason for that is the potential buyers that are in your home, they're going to want to see every livable square foot of that house. They're not going to want to not go into the backyard because your dog is in the back. They're not going to not want to go into the garage because all the animals are in there. So I just think it's really important for them to be really prepared for those specific things. Aside from the beds being made and just the basic things, those are a couple of items that they need to be prepared to do. Is just make sure that the dishes are out of the sink before they leave for the day. Make sure that they have a plan for their pets. Make sure all the beds are made. So yeah, there is a checklist, and it kind of at discretion on if I give a seller that checklist. Like,
hey, dummy, make sure you do this.
Yeah.
Okay. So first step was what you need to do to have your house ready to go. Here's all the things this is during your second meeting, you've gone through and you've said, okay, here's all the stuff that we need to do to make sure that your house shows in the best light. And here's what I'm going to do to help you to make sure that it shows in the best light. Okay. So you've gone through that in detail with them. The second part of this is, okay, now the house is ready. Now we're going to start showing it. So what do you go through with them at that point to say, okay, now that we have the house ready, here's what you need to know as far as what happens when you actually have a showing. What do you walk through with them there?
So technology is great, but technology can be a little bit confusing, especially for older clients, because what'll happen is that once they get a showing, we have a showing system that will call and either notify or ask for permission, or an app that people can either accept, decline, or ask to reschedule the showing. So I kind of walk them through that process on what it looks like to actually get a showing, how to approve the showing. We already know how the house is going to look during the showing.
Right.
And then another thing that sometimes gets overlooked with showings is the seller needs to not be in the house.
Right.
And I know that that sounds really basic and everybody knows, but not everybody knows
They
that.
don't.
They don't.
They don't. No.
So
You know that as an agent, and I know that
Yeah.
as a lender, but sellers don't necessarily know
and
that.
the sellers need to be gone. Their teenage kids need to be gone. The kids that are skipping school need to not be in the bed. That has happened. Yeah. So, that's important. And also too, let's talk about a showing window, because what we're generally doing when buyers agents are out is we've got a list of sometimes 8 or 9 houses, and we're like, okay, we're trying to get from point A to point B. We're trying to unlock this one. This is an owner occupied, so we're trying to be really cognizant of, their timeline. This house is vacant, and we're going through a lot of work and effort putting our showing cart together to make this really seamless for not only our clients as the buyers, but also the sellers.
Right.
Your showing window is a window. So if you get an appointment and it's from 10 to 11, they might come at 10:59.
Right.
And is that a little inconvenient? Absolutely. Was that their intention? Probably not. But they're trying to work through that. Now, if it's 11:15 and they haven't come, give me a call and say, hey, I saw on my Ring doorbell that the buyer's agent hasn't come, and I will communicate with the buyer's agent. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We're stuck in traffic. I couldn't find your phone number. Do you mind if we're a few minutes late? Or my client bailed. I forgot to call. I'm unfortunately an irresponsible agent. Sorry, your seller cleaned the whole house and yada, yada,
Yes.
yada. We're not
Yes.
showing up.
Right.
Whatever the case may be. But that's kind of generally how it works. So I like to prepare them for what the expectation is for the timeline and things like that. Another interesting thing that we need to make sure that we go over is making sure that they've got access to their home once the buyer's agent locks up. One tricky thing that hangs sellers up a lot is, oh man, I don't even have a key to my front door anymore. Right. I only use my garage door to get in the house. And now the laundry room door between the garage and the laundry room is now locked.
And you're stuck.
And the only key to the entire property is inside the lockbox in Saginaw, and I'm in Forney.
Right.
That's not a great call.
Right.
That's really not. So just prepare them to make sure that they've got the access to their own home, which you would think would be self-explanatory, and yet.
Well, and again, but these are little things, right? These are small details, but important details, because you have to be able to, again, the whole point of this conversation is that you have to be able to communicate to your clients all the things that you are doing and why you're worth every nickel of what you're making. And so if you don't walk through these little details, and nowadays, especially, and why we keep kind of referencing going back to like writing this stuff out as part of your listing presentation, because this seems like, yeah, no, duh, I do this. This is what I'm supposed to do. But it's so paramount now, because there will be questions about commissions. It's going to happen. People are going to ask questions about it. They're going to ask what they have to pay to buyers. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this stuff's going to come up. So when this stuff comes up, you have to have all of this presented in a manner that when a seller sits down and looks at the 20 or 30 pages of stuff that you've given them, or the 50 slide point, PowerPoint slide, and then they think for a second, oh, I could list this house on my own. No, you can't.
Well, I think that
you can, but I can drive my car with my feet. Doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and I think unfortunately too, our job being a licensed realtor doesn't really prepare you to be an effective real estate agent. And a lot of the things that I know that I can prepare for is because I've run into problems.
Yeah.
I've had all of these circumstances that I'm talking to you about. They have all come up. So part of my value proposition is that you're not paying me for this one listing. You're paying for the 100, however many that I have. That way I can prepare you. I can prepare you emotionally. I can help prepare your house physically and set those expectations and not overlook the small details that seem self-explanatory that are really important steps.
Yeah. Well, you even told me before, because we were kind of talking about this, about how, you try to tell your sellers, when you leave the house to let for the showing, set the house up the way that you want it to show, because often, you want them to come in and have that experience right out of the gate. And then the agent, whoever is showing the home, will often leave the house the way that you set it up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the showing instructions, a lot of times I will have it listed as leave the home, leave lights or home or however the circumstances as found.
Yeah.
Because what we've experienced now in this day and age where a lot of hybrid or remote workers are home and they can set it perfectly, because we were programmed, a while back where we would turn off every light and do
Right.
everything. But now, we don't know if there's maybe a showing right behind us. And the way that we've arrived is how the seller wants that house set up for the next buyer to come in. So yeah, we can be very specific
Yeah.
as a listing agent on how to instruct the buyer's agent to see the house and leave it as presented.
Right. And again, you are communicating this to your sellers so that way they understand, hey, here's what's going to sell your house the best. Okay. Because the whole way you're framing this conversation and the reason, because I think prior to these changes that are coming, most agents would all have these conversations. Like you would talk about it. You're never leaving this stuff out. The difference now is that now you really, it's in your best interest as an agent from listing side and especially a buyer side when we get to there. But from a listing side is to have all this very clearly defined, because this is part of you selling yourself. This is part of you explaining to them why this stuff is important, because you're telling them, hey, these are the things that you need to do to make sure that your house shows well. Here's why you need to do these things. And again, we're all getting to the place where the reason I'm asking you to do this stuff is because this is what's going to get you the most value, have the most buyers interested, and get you the best dollar for your house. And that's what my job is to make sure that happens.
Right.
All right. So now let's talk about. So we've said, okay, we've got here's what the house needs to have to be ready to go. All the repairs and whatever you need to fix. Here's what you can expect during your showing. Okay, and what's going to go on there. All right. Now we get into the other piece of it, which is, okay, how as a listing agent am I going to tell the world that your house is for sale? How am I going to market this property to make sure that you get the best bang for your dollar? So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, that's where your unique value proposition comes into play. Are you a drone person? Are you a social media person? Are you a networking person? What specifically can you do that's going to bring the value to the sale of the home? Now, of course, the must do is you've got to put it on the MLS, right? So that is a little bit confusing because there are opportunities for individuals to list their house on the internet. But where the MLS is a little different is that, it's an agent only tool. And we've got specific filters that can really get down to some very nitty gritty specifics. And in terms of
Bedrooms, pools,
yeah,
neighborhoods.
a lot of those things. And then that in turn will push out to the third party sites.
Right.
Now, believe me, it is not a perfect system. It's gotten a little better on how the MLS is structured for particularly like full baths and half baths. 3-car garages sometimes get messed up. So what I'll do is after I put the listing in the MLS and it pushes off to the third party sites, I'll check the big ones. I'll go to realtor.com and Zillow and, Redfin and all of that to make sure that it's right. There even is like a back agent portal into Zillow that says, hey, I'm the listing agent on this specific property. This information didn't export properly out of the MLS. Can you please fix it? Because we know, consumers don't have access to the MLS. So, things like that.
And that's important, because if you're missing something, like if it didn't say that it was a 3-car garage, even though you put that in the listing and it didn't port over to Redfin or Zillow or homes.com or whatever the case may be, well, that's going to eliminate a certain amount of buyers that would otherwise look at your house because they're specifically looking for a 3-car garage, right? So again, part of your service as marketing your property is not only am I putting it on the MLS, which is a portal that only agents have access to. You have to be a licensed realtor in order to list a house on the MLS. But also, I've got to make sure that all of the sites that consumers can access, that information is correct. So that's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to put it on the MLS because I want to make sure that, realtors that can also access this, but I'm also going to make sure that all the other sites that someone can access, I can go on there and double check and make sure that it all ports over correctly. And if it doesn't, then I can go back in and get it fixed because I've done that before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that's really important. And, like for me, I'm blessed because I have a really great broker who is very, very adamant on our expertise in the area. Like
Right.
what is your competency? And so I prefer to refer agents if I have a potential buyer or seller in a market that I am not competent. So for me, being a local market expert is something that I bring to the table that I hope that the other licensed agents are doing. So part of that is I live in Mansfield, so I'm a member of every mom's social group, every networking group, every media group, every
Damn.
buy sell trade,
Mansfield,
every
Facebook, Mansfield moms. What Mansfield moms?
Mansfield moms, all of those things. I'm friends with a lot of great agents. So like my social media, like I don't even need to be on a broker page because, all the great listings come through because I'm friends and have worked with some great agents in the area. And that kind of boots on the ground is not something that you can really replicate very easily.
Right.
So, being a true market expert, being really competent in where you're buying and selling is certainly something really
And again,
important.
you have to explain this. You have to share this. You have to write this out. You have to tell you can't just say, I'm a market. I mean, you've got to tell them why and how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or how do you know about me?
Yeah.
Oh, because she's in this group or she volunteers with the PTA or she's booster club president or whatever it is.
Right.
And also too, oh, she's a genuinely good person.
Right.
Like that's something I guess maybe is debatable. I don't know. But that's really important. And then, maybe you're the best open houser that there ever was.
Right.
That could be something that could be your own
open houser. I like that.
Your own specific value proposition.
Yeah.
I have clients that prefer to not have open houses. I have clients that would like to have an open house every week. It doesn't matter to me.
Right.
I'm happy to do whatever they want. But you just have to be really clear at what is it that makes you special? What makes you set apart?
You have to, and I think you can give options too, right? You can say, hey, look, if you want to do open houses, we can do this. We can do it. This is the way that I do them. This is how when I think the best times of doing this are, I think giving the client options, because everybody's going to market the property different, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's where when it gets to this is my unique value proposition, that's where it plays a big role, because you as an individual have unique skills that someone else may or may not have. And so this is the place where you really want to highlight that stuff, because that's what's going to endear you to your clients and get future referrals, because they're like, hey, Susan, if you want to sell your house in Mansfield, like she knows everybody. So sell it with her, because you're going to get multiple people involved. Or, this person, did an open house, 4 times throughout the property and had this really cool process of getting people in and keeping their data and following up with them and all that kind of stuff. And so whatever it is that you are really good at, then this is the place where you want to highlight that and explain what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, the time spent in doing it, and even sometimes some of the costs that you're going to incur going through that. It's kind of like the photography, right?
Well, yeah. And, part of being plugged into the community is also what tradesmen, what vendors, who are you relying on? How can you be an excellent referral source to your seller?
Right.
That's really important.
Because you've created relationships.
Because you've created relationships.
Yep. And these are people that are in the community that that you trust, that you've already done work with before. So you're not vetting out somebody new, which again goes back to, why are you important in this process? Why are you necessary? Why is the money that what are you bringing to the table that's so important to make sure that your sellers understand that, so they understand exactly what your money, value is worth?
Yeah, it's not even surprising to me anymore. Anytime anything in terms of a seller needs something done, it's rare that they even use their own resources. They're like, who do you know who can maintain my yard while I'm traveling, or who do you know who can make this repair, or
right.
XYZ.
You're a connector of people.
Exactly.
Yeah. You've built the relationships, these people. So now you're putting them together. And that's the other piece. Again, here's my network of people. Here are the landscape folks. Here's my electricians. Here are my, all of the people that I have relationships with, that I can help with this process and help you fix something. I can help you maintain something. I can make sure that when the inspector comes in, I can tell you what you can expect, how he's going to put it together. All of this stuff. Again, if you have this, presented and written, this all goes back to 20 pages of, oh my gosh, I couldn't ever imagine trying to do this on my own. There's so much involved that I never even considered as a seller. I just thought it was just throw it up on Zillow and it all works out well. Well, no, it doesn't. These are all the things that are involved with it. And your job now, it had always been this way, but especially now, is to clearly communicate this in a way that they will remember and understand and value.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're doing it. All right. So now it comes down to, All right, we've told them what needs to be fixed. We've told them what to expect in the listing process. We've told them how we're going to sell this home and why you're so good at it. So now we have the hard conversation, or the easy conversation sometimes, which is, all right, what is the house actually worth? Okay, so tell me what your philosophy and how you handle that piece.
The most important thing, and this has really pulled me out of my comfort zone because I am the biggest people pleaser.
Yes.
So when somebody says, I want to list my house for 750,000, I really want to get $750,000
Right.
for them.
Right.
It has very much pulled me out of my comfort zone to be very clear and direct. Because if you're going to hire me, then that's my obligation to you.
Right.
And so I personally like to give a range when I'm pricing a house.
Okay.
I like to give, well,
A range, or like different ways to do it.
well, I mean, it kind of depends. And a lot of it has to do with the price of the house.
Right.
So for me, typically I'll sell more expensive homes.
Uh-huh.
And so a range is better because when you're talking big numbers,
Right.
the span is different.
Yeah.
When you're talking
$20,000 is a lot of money, but it's a whole lot of money on a $300,000 house. It's not that much money on $1 million home.
right. So that's about perspective. So there's, and this comes back to the timeline, which is the thing that we talked about at the very beginning. Why are you selling, and when do you need your house sold? Because that is a really key factor in how we're going to price the house.
Right.
So whether that's in a very aggressive pricing strategy, whether we're going to try to sell that home as fast as we can, get your money in the bank, and you're on to your next adventure, that's option number one. There's kind of the average safe move, which is just kind of a general based on the recently sold, not really taking a huge comparison on the home's features or things like that, kind of just a safe space average market price. And then you're a little optimistic. You're thinking that your house is way better than the 20 other houses that have sold,
Right.
for whatever reason that is. And so we can try to get to that.
Yes.
But I'm needing to be realistic with you that this is I'm not saying we're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yes. Yes. It might be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And, so one thing too, that's really important to consider is that it's not necessarily what somebody's willing to pay for the house. It's what the bank is willing to give that person
Right.
to buy the house. And
Right.
you're obviously the expert with that in
Right.
terms of the lending piece, but the appraisal means a lot because your house may be overpriced per square foot, but the most affordable in the neighborhood, and somebody is dying to get into that neighborhood and
Right.
they're willing to pay a premium. And then 10 days before closing, you've accepted this great offer. Cool. But also there's an opportunity that the house is not going to appraise.
Right.
And what people don't understand is that what you're going to have in that circumstance is not only your down payment and your closing cost, but if the seller doesn't renegotiate the price, the difference between what the house appraised for and the contract price.
Right.
And that gets really stressful.
Well, and this is part of explaining again your value, your brain, right? You're telling them, hey, look, I've been through this, okay. And I think a lot of sellers think, oh, well, if it doesn't appraise, they agreed to pay, $750, so they're paying $750. It's like, no, I mean, they can, and they certainly, that's an option, but they may not be able to. They may have never intended, because the difference, because realize the bank, and this again, you're telling this as a listing agent, the bank is only going to lend off what the appraised value is. They're not going to lend off of what the client offered to pay. Now, the client or the buyer can pay over the appraised value if they want to, right? And there are some, stipulations in there where, depending on the down payment, there's a few things that you have some legal opportunities there. But either way, they may not be able to, right? And as a lender, I can come up with a lot of ways to which somebody doesn't qualify for a house, right? So if the house comes in 50,000 or 100,000 short, again, we're talking $1 million homes or whatever.
Right.
Well, then if they don't have an extra 100 grand sitting in the bank to put down, then they can't. Right. So this is another avenue for you to be able to say, hey, look, I know you want this price for this house and you think it's worth this much.
And somebody may very well be willing to pay that.
Somebody may be willing to pay that. But we could also run into a hurdle because of appraisals, because based on what I've run, my comps, my CMA, everything that I've put together for you, this is where I think it's going to appraise. Okay. This is probably pretty close. And if we get this, maybe they could. And oh, by the way, you can tell them, hey, the appraiser gets the contract. When they go appraise the property, they have the contract in hand. They know exactly how much you're offering to pay for the house, right? So they know they have a target to shoot for. So they don't get there, there's a reason. And you need to make your sellers aware of that fact, because that helps you in the negotiation of, okay, what do we want to list this house for? And here's my 3 strategies, but this optimistic strategy, here are the hurdles we could run into for that. And you need to be aware of that, because I've had this happen before. This one time it was this, and this one time, this is when you want to give those stories and explanations and examples of what happened.
Well, absolutely. And at the end of the day, I work for my seller.
Yeah.
I'll do within reason pretty much what they want in terms of the listing.
Can I get that same?
Oh, we'll talk about that later. But it's really important just to be really clear with expectations. And I've had clients that are like, you know what, it's fine. If I list it for this and I get a buyer and it doesn't appraise, then I understand what you're saying and we'll renegotiate.
Right.
And as long as you're okay with that and you're comfortable with that, I'm comfortable with that too. There have been circumstances where a house is so unique that there are features that I really don't know how an appraiser is going to view it.
Yeah.
There's not any comps. I mean, I'm digging around, going 10 miles from the subject property, or, just trying to do everything I can to be reasonable. I've had to put appraisal packets together so that I can have something already ready for an appraiser to come in. That's something that I am happy to do and would like to do, because it's in everybody's best interest for this house to appraise. So, that,
yeah,
as long as you're upfront with it. One thing I do want to circle back on, though, is that if a client does have a tough, tight timeline on selling and they go with the very aggressive pricing, that could work out in their
sure
benefit too.
Get a bidding
Because
war.
if you're underpricing it, then
you have a lot of interest.
You're going to have a lot of interest.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So you might be going back up to what maybe the average would have been, or possibly even the optimistic pricing strategy, just depending on how the market receives the house.
Right. And this is where, again, as a listing agent, you want to present this in some sort of a written form to say, here's my aggressive pricing strategy. Here are the benefits to it. It might sell fast. It might sell above what we're asking for. We might get into a bidding war. Here's my average pricing scenario. It might take this long to sell it. It might take 30 days as opposed to 2 or 3 weeks. Here's my optimistic pricing point. It's going to take a certain buyer in a certain situation with all these certain, so it might take 3 to 6 months to sell the house in this. So giving, the pros and cons of each approach, giving the price of each approach, and then giving the timelines of each approach from your professional opinion is going to play a big role in demonstrating the value in your knowledge. And I think a great phrase I think to use often is, well, based on my experience and based on what I know about doing this, and based on my previous, knowledge of this, how this all plays, this is how I expect it to work out. Because it's like we've talked about before, when you hire a plumber to come fix your toilet and it takes him, 5 minutes to do it, right? And he charges you $350. You're like, ugh, but it would have taken me 3 days to do it, and probably flooded the bathroom and did all this stuff along. So you're not paying him for his time. You're paying him for his experience and his expertise, because he's been doing it for 20 years or 10 years or however long he's been doing it.
That's right. Well, and another thing too is I do not have a crystal ball.
Right.
I have data that I'm trying to analyze, and I'm doing my absolute best to use my experience and my expertise to steer you in the right direction. But the reality is that the price of the home is a moving target.
Yeah.
And it's a moving target all the way through, because a pending house, which means that it's already under contract but has not closed, could drastically change.
Right. Okay. So we're getting close to the end here. So we're going to kind of wrap it up with the hardest part of this, which is now we're going to be talking about money. Okay. So now we have told them what they need to do to get their house ready to list. We've told them what to expect when they're listing it and showing it and what goes on there. Told them how we're going to market it. We've told them what we think the pricing is and why. Okay. Now we got to say, okay, here's how much money you're going to walk away. And we do this at the end, obviously, because in this process, we have to build up all of this value and understanding and expertise to be able to get down to the bottom line and go, okay, this is how much you can expect to walk away from with this transaction. So how do you have those conversations?
Yeah. So that's really black and white. Anything in money needs to be in black and white. That's why everything in real estate is signed and initialed. It's the right strategy to put everything in writing as best as you can. There's a preliminary seller net sheet that we put together that lists out as best as we know it at that time. I mean, a lot of this is a moving target, but as of right now, the buyer's agent commission, the listing agent's commission. Now the new rules are going to make that a little bit tricky. So how we go about doing that is, maybe going to change. But what prorated taxes are, and how we anticipate the transaction going.
Right.
Basic expenses of the
Yeah.
transaction that are black and white.
Right.
So we put that in writing in a seller net sheet based on how we anticipate it going. And then, of course, once an offer comes in the door, then we can revise that based on that specific offer.
And I would even suggest to go as far as doing a net sheet for each one of those scenarios: your aggressive pricing, your average pricing, your optimistic pricing. Now, obviously, the optimistic one is going to look great. But if you really want to go the extra mile, you can also say, okay, I know this optimistic one looks like you're walking away with an extra $50,000 than you would on my aggressive. That's true. But let's look at the holding costs on this, because if you're having to sit here for 6 months and wait versus moving now, if you're not in a hurry, if you want to stay and keep doing that, great, right? No problem. There isn't a lot of holding costs. But if you're in a hurry to get out of here and you've got to be somewhere where now you're paying rent over here, or you're paying, this house mortgage, now you've got 2 mortgages, now you're paying utilities in both spots. So yeah, the number looks bigger, but here's the holding costs, and here are the costs for doing that as well. And again, breaking that all down so it's very clear to the seller as to exactly, I like this optimistic pricing structure, but I understand the risks that come with that. So let's move, in this direction.
Right.
And you have to give them the choice to make that decision. All right. So with the pricing, you want to be very specific. You want to walk through it very clearly, give them all the expected costs on what you think is going to be there. Of course, everything's subject to change. There's variations and all this stuff depending on the price. Obviously, if you're doing a a percentage-based commission, then your commission as the agent is going to fluctuate based on the price of the home, and you can explain that. If you decide you want to move to a flat fee, which there are some agents that are doing that,
right,
that'll be an easy conversation, because you say, this is what my flat cost is. If you decide, some people are talking about doing hourly, and we'll see where all this goes. Nobody knows. But if you decide to do that, this is the place where you want to go through that as well. I think right now it's pretty much status quo. Everybody's staying in the percentage level, or, doing it for 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever it is you decide that you're going to list the property for. But these are adjustments that you're going to have to make along the fly. The good news is that's the easy part to fix, right? Because if you've put together your entire proposition, you've got all the stuff that we've talked about up to this point put together. Well, then when you start adjusting how you think you want to charge or don't charge, well, that's an easy thing to fix. You just fix one little piece, because you're not having to go back and adjust everything else that you've already created. Now, real quick before we wrap it up, so after August 17th, all this stuff, all the buyer offer compensation goes away. So you, Susan Mills, how are you going to handle that conversation when a seller says, do I have to pay a buyer agent commission?
Well, one thing that's really important to remember is that has always been negotiable.
Right.
So I would expect that I guess the answer is no, but I would expect to compensate a buyer to offset the expense of them paying for their own agent. So whether or not a seller is paying the buyer's agent directly or indirectly, or possibly a combination.
Right.
A combination of that.
Right.
Right.
Well, and it's all going to depend on the market too, right? Because if we're sitting in a market where rates, like let's say rates go to 8%, God, please don't have that happen. But let's say that we got a lender and a realtor living in the same household, please don't have rates at 8%. But let's say that they go to that high or whatever. Well, now you could very much be in what's we would call a buyer's market, right? Where by the way, Dallas Fort Worth, the listings have gone up recently quite a bit. So there's a lot more homes available for sale. Some are good, some are bad, depends on the area that you're in, but ultimately they have gone up. And so, when you're looking at a seller or a buyer's market, now buyers have selection, they have choice, they can pick, right? Well, if you're a seller and you need to sell it aggressively, then the conversation needs to be, hey, look, you're going to be, better off if you're compensating the buyer's agent in this transaction, or be willing to. We can't list it, we can't, advertise it. But when I talk to the buyer's agent, when they call me, they're going to ask, so what do you want me to tell them? Are you willing to do that? And up to what level and how much and all that kind of stuff? Because if you want to sell it quickly, the buyer, it's not that the agent's going to push them in one direction or the other on a property. It's just the buyer may not have the money.
Well, that's the part that is difficult. It's not that a buyer's agent doesn't have the willingness to
Yeah.
pay their agent. A lot of buyers don't have the ability,
Right.
on top of the other expenses when it comes to home ownership.
Yeah.
Everything has gotten more expensive.
Yeah. The down payment, the closing costs, everything else
All
is
the things.
it's up. So but that's the conversation you have to have. Hey, seller, I'm going to get phone calls from buyers, agents, and they're going to ask about the property. They're also going to ask me your willingness to pay their commission. What do you want me to tell them? You can walk through the scenarios for them, but in a buyer's market, the more you're willing to do that, the more, opportunity for buyers you're going to get. Now, if the market changes and let's say rates go down to 5% in a year, well, now if we don't have more listings available than we have right now, then there's going to be properties in high demand, right? Then we're going to get to a place where you're going to have multiple buyers coming in wanting to offer on your home. So now as a seller, you can discern. Maybe I don't. That's part of it. Like you said, everything's negotiable at that point. So we were in a place where people weren't paying title policies and people were giving the amendments to guarantee over appraised value. We were not, that wasn't that long ago. If we get into that place again, then you can explain to your sellers, hey, look, in that circumstance, you don't have to if you don't want to.
Right.
And it's going to be up to the buyer's agent how they handle it. One thing to keep in mind too, in this whole thing is that with these new rules, as a buyer agent, you have to establish your commission prior to showing homes. So as part of this buyer's listing or this buyer's agreement, if you say, buyer, I'm going to get 1%, or I'm going to get a flat fee, or I'm going to get hourly, whatever it is. If the buyer, let's say in the example, the buyer's agent says, I'm getting 2% from however, the seller, from you, whoever. Okay. Well, if as a seller, your seller's willing to pay 3, it doesn't matter. The buyer still only gets 2. They can only get paid what's represented in their buyer's agreement, at least as far as I understand it right now. So in this scenario, it's going to be up to, you can tell your sellers, hey, look, how much you pay is going to depend on what the agreement between the buyer and the buyer's agent is. So that's going to determine how much you would pay if you're willing to pay the buyer's agent commission. And I guess maybe part of this will be, we get, as a listing agent, as a listing agent, you get a copy of, or at least an idea of what, the agreement is.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. There's going to be paperwork.
Yes.
There's going to be more paperwork, but it really is in the best interest of the consumer for everybody to be really, really clear, because that is something that is interesting that I think that we have skimmed over for a long time, that our buyer's rep agreement has always said that if the listing broker does not pay, the client is responsible.
Right. Now,
whether or not the buyer's agent has held a client to that, I don't know. I'm sure that's happened before, but it wasn't a conversation that we ever had or needed to have. Right. And also too, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but in terms of when the market was really aggressive and especially investor clients were only listing 2% buyer's agent commissions, I'm certain that all of those buyer's agents had 3% representation agreements, but they weren't holding them to that.
Right. Right.
So, this has always been a negotiation. We're just having to have hard conversations. We're having to be more transparent. We're having to do more planning, and the reality is we don't know how it's all going to happen. But one thing that I do think is really important is that I like to talk to and remind my clients is that this is not an adversarial relationship.
Right.
It's not them against us.
Right.
It's collaboratively, how are we going to meet everybody's goals, and how are we going to do that with the least amount of heartburn possible?
Right. And the key to all of this again is that if you're clear up front with everything that you're doing, you're clear with all of the timelines, you're clear with all the expectations. And again, you've written it all out in some form or fashion, and you're presenting this to your sellers, then this is going to take the stress away from the transaction. It's going to take away any kind of anxiety that they're going to have about what exactly is expected of them. They're going to understand why it's so important that you're there, right? Why you need to be representing them, because in a way, it's good that it's a little overwhelming, because it's a lot of stuff. But that again is just one more indication, like, man, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad I have you, because if I didn't, all of this stuff, I wouldn't have thought of 80% of it. And the other 20% that I maybe would have thought of, I would have had to have done. And that would have, not exactly at the top of my list of things to do.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because like kind of the sad part about real estate is that there are clients that I see, socially or whatever, but during that time of the transaction, like we bond, like
Yeah.
we talk every day, multiple times a day, calling, texting. We're allies in this together. And then the house closes and I'm like, oh, I guess we're not friends anymore.
And then you just see them on Facebook
And then we see
comment.
him on Facebook, and,
Yes.
and that truly is sad because that is one of my very favorite things about real estate is building those relationships, and so
Well, and the goal of all this is you're trying to get referrals, right? That's
Yeah.
what we're here for. We're trying to do such a great job and be so clear with what we do that they tell their friends, their family, everybody that you were amazing. And it's funny. I think because everybody is so, most agents are pretty referral heavy and they work with their friends and they don't. I think people will kind of cut some of this short when they're working with because like, oh, they know, like I'm going to take great care of them. But I think in those circumstances, it's more important to go above and beyond than what you would do for somebody that you don't know, because these transactions, like you said in the beginning, it's such a personal transaction that could make or break that friendship, that relationship, that whatever, because it's such a personal thing that if you weren't clear about everything that you were doing up front, you just assumed that they knew, and then they assumed that you were going to do something that you didn't say, or whatever the case may be, you might lose a friend over that stuff. So it's even more important.
it's really important, and that is a really good point. Is be discerning on that too, because you don't want a bad real estate transaction really affecting other parts of your life.
No.
That's not fun.
No. And to cover yourself and to make sure that you're, in the best situation with all of your clients in the future, this is the thing that you have to do. You have to go through, you have to put this together. You have to sit down, you have to think about it. Hopefully you can use this episode as a guide to kind of help you remember, oh yeah, I forgot I do that. Oh yeah. Because look, we all know what you do while you're going through the process, but you don't remember all of it in the moment through your conversations, right? It's like you're in your house and you know that you need milk. But if you don't write it on your grocery list and remind yourself when you're at the grocery store to get the milk, at least for me, you're going to forget, or you could forget. And so that's why it's so important in paramount to put all of this stuff in writing. So when you present it to your clients, you remember everything that you do. You go over it all in great detail and you don't miss anything. So that way it's clear what you're doing. The expectations are set properly, and everybody walks away feeling very, very comfortable about what's happening and what they're paying for it without any concerns. Because again, when you get to the last day and they're signing on the bottom line and they've sold their home and they're getting that big check in the bank or they're moving off to their new adventure, you want them to have a wonderful feeling and a wonderful taste in their mouth. So that way you continue to do business in the future.
What it's about.
That's right. All right, dear. Well, we're over our time a little bit, so I appreciate you coming and doing this with me. I know you weren't really excited about it, but
I am excited. I was excited. It was fun, but that also did force me to kind of review my policies and procedures too, which is something that's evolving. We can't just sit on cruise control anymore.
Yeah, we got to get out there and be professionals in this thing and present who we are to our clients, because that's how you're going to survive. Business is slower right now. It's it's been on the decline some, and we're moving into the summer, so it will pick up a little bit. We're getting more listings. There's going to be more traction. Rates have come down a little. They're moving around a little bit, but they're getting better. So once these things take place, it is going to be out there in the zeitgeist of culture, letting people know that, hey, agent commissions, they've always been negotiable, but now it's going to be out there and people are going to ask questions. Yep. And you have to have answers to those questions.
Don't pretend it's not happening. It's here.
It's here. It's happening. You got to be ready for it. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you to everybody that stuck around with us. I know we didn't get, this was a technical one. We didn't get into the, whatever the ins and outs of the Susan and Mike life, but maybe on another one.
Who cares about that?
That's right. Nobody cares. We're going to do this again in a few, a month or so. We're going to go into on the buyer side of things. So we're going to do a similar episode about how to do your proposition to a buyer prior to the August 17th date. So hope you get ready and tune in for that one. Otherwise, I hope everybody has a great week. School's out. For most places, we were out of school today, so now it's summer. That could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on who's living in your home. But summertime is here, and everybody's excited. So everybody have a great summer. Would you like to say anything before we go, dear? She's full of words today. All right, guys. I appreciate everybody. We will see you back. I'll have my market update out on Tuesday. We'll be talking more about rates as always, market trends, and go into a few other topics. So hope you guys can tune in, and we'll see you then. Say bye, dear.